Let's hear it. James, it's so wonderful to have you back. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah, hello?
Yeah, it's on. We worked out the mics. Congratulations on another season of The Blacklist. I know you're in the middle of shooting this season. And from what I understand, it's a bit of a reset for you guys. The creators and the writers have said that you're sort of resetting the tone after everything went very dark last season. Is that true?
I think we've tried to sort of have the tone of the show be sort of fluid throughout its lifespan so far, and I think that this is part of it. So I don't think this will be. I don't think it'll be startling. I don't think it is. It just is an element that's always been part of the show that now is being well nurtured by Reddington. You know, things have been very bad for quite some time, and he's had to deal with sort of one crisis after another. Last season, it was just one crisis after another. And things have sort of bottomed out, and I think he finds it a refreshing place to be. And so he's sort of like a pig in shit.
But kind of enjoying the shit a little bit.
As a pig would. Yes. I think he is enjoying it. He's enjoying it immensely. And doesn't seem to be in any real rush to get back down to business. Although he does, you know, he has to pay his rent, and he has limited means to pay his rent, and so he. Did they have the car in that trailer? Did you see the car that he was driving around in? Okay, well. That was someone else's car. Anyway,
that's the first scene of the first episode. It's available online, so we won't be spoiling anything to talk about that scene.
Okay. Right.
And that is a scene where he essentially, cons his way into taking this car for a joyride.
He's really just trying to pay the rent.
He's kind of bottomed out and is having a pretty good time at this point.
He is. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said before, in previous seasons or in the last season, it's been one crisis after another, and now he can kind of create his own crises and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, and I think also it allows the show to have a breath and the audience to have a breath of fresh air for a moment. And listen, there's always been a sort of good mix of sort of intensity and irreverence on the show. But it's nice to every so often be able to put the trouble on the shelf for a moment and have a breath of fresh air and have some fun. And the show has always had that. It's always been part of the show's sort of landscape or character. And I think we just were, we wanted to have fun in doing it, and as you said, it was it had gotten rather dire at the end of last season, and it ended in a very tough place. And so one of the things that's great about this show, and I think because of the strange engine for the show, this guy is, and this was apparent even from the pilot, is you can shift direction in the show very swiftly, and tonally, but also in terms of plot and story. Things can begin and they can end very, very swiftly, and so that's what we are doing at the beginning of the season, and it's still continuing on. I'm in episode 6 right now, or just finished episode 6, and there's a lot of fun to be had, along with. Red's life is, even at its best, Red's life is in peril at all times, it seems. And so he's still faced with that.
But he enjoys that peril. I mean, you've said before, he's comfortable in chaos.
Yeah, I don't know whether he enjoys it, but he certainly is comfortable. Mm-hmm. Or used to it, maybe.
Yeah.
He's fine in a rocky landscape.
The show, one of its central mysteries, sort of the will they or won't they of the Blacklist, was whether or not Reddington was Elizabeth's father. It was always hinted at. Everybody was fairly sure, and then it was confirmed at the end of last season. How do you sort of move a show forward after sort of confirming one of the central mysteries of the show for 4 seasons?
I think it's, probably much to everybody's chagrin. I think it's part of it is me coming out, being able to come out here and say, as has always been the case with the Blacklist, just don't get too comfortable with what you might think is the truth about anything or what, I just think it's important to be open to surprise and be open to the fact that on the show that when you're given an answer to something, it really also poses more questions. Like, why the hell would a central question to this show be answered in the 4th season with seasons to go? Why would that be? Enough said.
James, I'm curious. I was watching an interview with you recently. You said that you've had the same agent basically since the beginning of your career, and you've played a lot of just incredible roles that have been very irreverent and idiosyncratic. And I'm wondering, even going back to your first role, I was watching a trailer for this movie called The New Kids that you were in.
People have always blamed that on me. And now that you point out and you make that relationship, maybe they should blame it on my agent. I mean, maybe it's my agent who's in fact very idiosyncratic and has that sort of taste. I don't know. It could be, but
well, I'm wondering where your taste lied before you started acting, and what actors made you want to act, and if they were at all along the same line as sort of how you approached characters.
Yes.
So what actors when you first before you got your first role when you started were some people that you looked up to that made you want to perform?
I was very lucky. My parents were both teachers, and we really didn't go to the movies very much. I really can't remember a movie we went to. We really never went to the movies. It just wasn't. We didn't have that expendable income. The expendable income was spent on other things. Like clothing and books. But in any case, we didn't go to the movies really, and we really didn't watch television very much. We were actually, oddly, we were allowed, it was like, there were these 2 movies that during the course of the year, I don't know how this came to be, but we would sit down when it would show up at that time of year that 2 movies were going to air on television, and at that time there were 3 stations. We would sit down and watch those 2 movies, and they were Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds and Wizard of Oz, and they seemed like an odd choice for a family, but that's what they were. Anyway, and then there were a couple of shows on PBS, like the sort of Mr. Rogers sort of shows, or another one that was called What's New, or What's News, or something like that. Anyway, so we didn't see a lot of movies. I've forgotten the question, but we didn't see a lot of movies growing up. And, I know what it was, but I was very lucky in that I grew up on a boarding school campus where my father was an English teacher. And the head of the art department at the school formed a club, a film club, a sort of an AV club, a film club, with students on campus. But if you were a faculty child, once you reached a certain age, you could join the film club as well for some nominal fee. It was. And he would get a print once every 2 weeks or something like that, or once every 3 weeks or something. He'd get a print of a film and he'd project it, and you'd see a film. And a short. He'd get a short and he'd get a film. And so I joined as soon as I possibly could because I wasn't able to get to the movies, and I loved movies, so I joined. So the movies I watched growing up were movies that people watched when they were growing up in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and so I was very lucky. I was seeing a broad spectrum of films, and a lot of films that you just wouldn't have seen if you were growing up in the 60s and 70s as I was. So I was seeing like Charles Laughton and Robert Mitchum, and
Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, Night of the Hunter, and
I mean, I could see Mitchum's performance in Night of the Hunter.
Yeah, like Hobson's Choice with or Witness the Prosecution, Charles Laughton, and just the list goes on and on and on and on. I'd be silly to try and come up with all the different people, but anyway, so those are the influences I had. I was very lucky that way, in that I really was growing up seeing some of the greatest films by some of the greatest filmmakers, and seeing them screened. Not on television, but seeing them screened. I loved that. I really used to so look forward to those Sundays. It'd be like Sunday afternoon, we go, and Oh, I loved it.
When did you make the decision to start performing, to start acting?
Well, we made believe a lot around the house, I just did that a lot, I still do that. That's what I do. So, but, and then in school, I did plays in school and so on. And then I stopped my formal education pretty early, so when I was 17, before I graduated from high school, and then I took a test so that I'd have a high school diploma. But, and I moved to New York, and I did other things. I didn't move here with the idea that, I grew up in Massachusetts. I didn't move here with the idea that I was going to, oh, you did where?
Western Mass, Northampton, East Hampton,
okay.
Amherst. Yeah, I went to school in Amherst.
Okay. I grew up just a half hour north of Boston in a little town called North Andover. Anyway, so I moved to New York really to become a private detective.
Wait, is that true?
Well, something of that sort. It would be like... then, a few other things happened, and I worked, ended up, doing a series of dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of, well, probably 3 to 4 dozen, odd jobs, different odd jobs, manual labor jobs, and so on, and all the time cultivating my, career in a multitude of fantasy, my career as a pirate or as a, whatever, mobster, private detective, whatever the things were, and spy, and and then I started continuing on with the acting. I just sort of continued, and I just didn't stop doing that. And then all of a sudden, I started earning a living at that, and it was certainly a lot better than unloading and loading railroad cars. In terms of, not that that's not a wonderful way to make a living, but you can make a better living as an actor, and the work isn't as hard. So I just kept pursuing it, and here I still am doing the exact same. I hate to say it. The terrible thing is that I still am just doing the exact same thing I did as a 6-year-old. Really, that's exactly what I do. There's no secret to it. There's nothing. There's no great thing. There was no plan. There really was no plan. Obviously, there was absolutely no plan. There might have been these sort of fantasies or imaginations, but, the sort of figment, of what it was. But truthfully, I just am doing the same thing I did when I was 6. I just, am making believe.
Did you start to notice after even though there was no plan, that you started making a living at it, that in the 80s you were, well, also, first off, let me just go back for a second. I think it's hilarious that you wanted to be a private detective and that you have such a heavy hand in Reddington's costumes because he dresses like a private detective out of like a Dashiell Hammett novel.
Okay. Well, I just thought it was enormously practical.
Classic film noir character.
Yeah, no, I think he just wears very practical clothing. That was really where it came from. Like, what does he wear? Well, what's his life like? And so, he's on the move a lot. He has to have, all of his clothing has to go with all the rest of his clothing. Everything has to be able to go with everything else. It has to be layers so that he can be in any kind of weather or any kind of climate. He has to have head protection because, and for the sun, or cold or whatever. And he has to be able to go from, out in the field and get in a helicopter or something and then go into a bank or a, meeting with somebody where he has to be dressed well. Shoes have to be very practical. So they have to look like dress shoes, and yet they've got a rubber tread bottom, like they're heavy, like you tromp around out in the woods and stuff. And he always has to have a jacket because he's got a firearm in the small of his back. And yet his clothing also had to look as if you're not sure where it came from. Part of it may have come from Hong Kong, but another part of it might have come from South America, and another part of it might have come from, it can't be of a place or a time either. because a lot of his life over the last decades have been sort of isolated and removed from whatever pop culture might be or any of the rest of that. So it has to feel sort of timeless too, you know.
Do you get to keep any of your Reddington outfits?
You know, I don't really care to.
I imagine you walking in and being like, I think he needs something from Hong Kong here too, guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. No, I don't really care to. I mean, every so often when something shows up that really is not very appropriate for him, but really would be great for me, then, you know.
Accidentally ordered.
Then that discussion can happen. But, you know, I find more often than not that costumes in film and television will ruin clothing in my life. Like, the fedoras have been impacted a little bit in my life because I've worn hats for years, and now it's part of my costume. So, you know, I'm making do. I mean, but I have been wearing different hats of late in my life because he wears hats, you know. So
going back to that period of time when you were just starting to act, and you said there was no real plan. In the 80s, you have this incredible series of roles that are beautiful weirdos or like beautiful pricks. And I'm wondering if, like, you know, by 89 or so, you started being like, where is this coming from? Why are you guys reaching out to me for these guys?
Well, interesting you picked 89, because in 88, I got sent a script and people were saying, you know, people are turning this down all around town. And I said, great, perfect for me. And so I took it and read it, and it was Sex, Lies, and Videotape, a film I did.
Which is the sort of taking that idea of what you were getting typecast in and turning it into something so much more sensitive and beautiful. That's one of my favorite movies.
Thank you.
Really interrupted you, sorry.
No. I don't know where I really, or whether I was going anywhere with that. But I don't know. As I said, I didn't have a plan, and I don't really have any reflection on the work that I've done. You know, I remember the work that I've done for the doing of the work. You know, the memories I have of a film have very little to do with what the end result is, because ultimately I don't really have much effect on the end result. I just have the work I do is the pieces that are all over the editing room, you know, and some of them are on the floor and some of them make it into the picture. But so when I look back, I don't look at the films. I look at the filming of the films, and that's my memory of them. So I very often will have a great memory, like a much more sort of present memory of a film that maybe nobody saw, or somebody, you know, or like backstage there, for lack of a better term, we were looking at, there's a wall of a whole bunch of photos of different people, I guess, who have been here. And I saw a picture of Josh Brolin, who I worked with on a completely forgettable picture years ago that I don't know if it ever even opened, really. It just was, I think, spat out into the atmosphere. We had a fantastic time. I just adored Josh. He's one of the funniest people I've ever worked with, and we just laughed until we cried. And the experience of shooting the film was absolutely indelible in my memory. We had the most like, we'd show up one morning and our set had been completely destroyed by a sandstorm. So we just sort of fucked off for a while. You know, I mean, it just was unbelievable. And then there was this one sequence, trying to move this truck, that it seemed like we took like a month just trying to shoot that one sequence. And yet it wasn't as if we were going and moving forward at all in the sequence. It was like we'd go back to square one and sort of shoot the thing. I don't know. I don't have no concept what the director was, but we were on board for it and having a ball doing it. The film was, I mean, from complete and utter mess. We never even finished shooting it, really.
Really?
But not really. I think they went back and sort of put in some pieces and filmed a few things so they could cobble together some
like
semblance of a
stock
story.
footage.
Yeah, no, I mean, they whatever actors they could persuade to come back in, or whoever wasn't busy or something, they brought them in and sort of cobbled together something out of it. But I remember being out in Lone Pine, California. I'd rented a house out there. Josh had rented a place. And us out there just really having a ball in the desert, making this thing together. Eating smoked oysters and, you know, hanging around.
Having a good time. And
Having a great time, really a great time. So that's my memory of a film of which I don't even know the title.
Let's get some questions from the audience right here.
Hi. So if Red was a person in real life and you happen to know him, do you think you'd be friends? Would you be enemies? Would you hate each other? What would your relationship be like, do you think?
I mean, I think he's, I think one of the dangers of Reddington is that I think he seems like he'd be great fun to hang out with, maybe, or at least to me, but, he's a really dangerous guy and probably not prudent to spend much time hanging around with him, but I like him. I like him. He's written as, that he's a very complex, interesting character, I think, to me is. That's why I took the role, is because I liked him. And yet I was, taken aback that I could find someone who lived the life that he lives and behaves the way that he does. I could find him as endearing as I found him. So I found that dichotomy to be very appealing in the playing of him. Now, the reality of actually hanging out with, I don't know whether everybody else, I certainly have known people in my lifetime, plenty of them, where, it was enticing, but arm's length was best. And he's probably that. But there's a really good evening in there, definitely.
How often do you find the writers, or even you, sort of inject a bit of James Spader into Reddington in terms of your personal taste, your style, your sense of humor?
Here and there. I don't know.
Next question.
I'm confident some.
But there's no percentage to give. How could
There's
we
no
possibly
percentage
do
for
that?
me to give you on that, but I certainly some. Ideas pop into your head, and sometimes they have to do with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever show up to set and sort of see a script and are like, oh, this writer got, this came from, he knew I was doing this or something?
That whole conversation would happen long before I showed up on the set. I get drafts. I get outlines first, then I get very early drafts, and the conversations start with the outlines, and we start working on it from there, and it continues through every draft until 3 to 4 to 5 drafts later, it turns into a production draft. And then the production draft goes through several drafts before it turns into the page that you're doing on the set. So
by the time you're on set?
By the time I'm on set, I am 9 times out of 10, I like to be saying exactly what is written on that page.
Next question.
Hi. Is there a role that you've not yet played or a character that you've not yet played that you look forward to playing?
Yes, without question. Yes. I have no idea what it is. But I know without question, with all certainty, that there's a lot of them. It'll be a great surprise when they show up.
What was it like doing the motion capture performance for the Avengers?
A great challenge. It really was. I was as if I was. I knew nothing. I really knew nothing and wasn't even entirely sure how to apply what I did know to that. So it was really a challenge every day, and that was very exciting. I think it probably would have been. It's what allowed it to really happen and have it be a really wonderful experience, because I just finished doing the first season of this show, of The Blacklist, and so I was pretty wrecked by the time I got over there. I flew over 2 days after we wrapped this full season, after 23 or something. I think we even did over 22 episodes that year. And 2 days later, I was flying to London to start. And so I was pretty wrecked by the time I got over there. But it really excited, and really because of the fact that I was going to be doing something that I just had to completely give up to, and and really rely on the army of people that every single one of them knew more than I did about what I was embarking on. And so that's great, to be working for decades and decades in a career and be faced with something that you are completely ill-equipped for. And then, as it turns out, pretty well-equipped.
Next question, right here.
Hi, thank you for
Hello.
being here. So this might be kind of an impossible question, but what's been your favorite episode to shoot of The Blacklist and why? Sorry.
I don't have one. I have certain obsessive-compulsive issues that I deal with in my life. And so questions of absolutes are very, very difficult for me. I actually just recently had a really startling experience in Rolling Stone magazine? Okay, so on the last page of Rolling Stone magazine, they have a little column called The Last Word. And I was asked to do that column, and I was honored because it's a magazine that I've read and known through my life. And I was sent a copy of the magazine to see what it was like, and I read the column, and I said, oh, but I was sort of reading it like I'd forgotten who the person was that the column was about, but I read the column, and I sort of just got lost and sort of interested in what the person was saying in it, and I didn't look at it in terms of what the format of the column was. And the column, as it turns out, when I got into the interview, was entirely questions about what's your favorite book? What's your favorite film? Who's your greatest hero? Every one was an absolute. And I started talking to the guy, the interviewer, and it was supposed to be an interview for an hour. And I got partway in, and I said, I did not have an answer for a single one of his questions. It would just all turn into this long, sort of circuitous paragraph about how I really couldn't get to what that would be. And I would have to list thousands of answers and why even that wouldn't work, and how I was starting to get extremely anxious. And we both came to a mutual agreement that I should not do the column. And Rolling Stone very politely said, I'm sure it set some sort of terrible precedent, but Rolling Stone very kindly said, thank you, but no thank you. And I was so relieved. My heart palpitations stopped at that point. It's a very difficult thing for me to answer. I'm sorry for that. I will say this. Boy, this is more than you counted on. But I will say this, is that it's never an episode. It's never an episode. It's never a film. In terms of my own work, it's never a film. It's never an episode. Sometimes it's not even a scene. It's just moments. That's what I like. They're just these moments, or these little, just a little thing. Those are the good things. And sometimes you're able to string enough of those together that, a speech works nicely or a scene might work well because you've strung enough along of those. But they're really just these little moments.
I think I have time for one more question. Right? Oh, hi. You were ready.
Hi. One
Hi.
of my favorite roles you ever played in was as Daniel Jackson in the movie Stargate.
Yes.
So I was just wondering how being a part of the Stargate franchise has affected your career.
Not in the least. Sadly. Really not in the least, because I wasn't part of any of the rest of it. I was just part of that one thing. It's actually sort of sad. We all were planning. No. We all were planning, those of us who made the film, we were all planning on doing a sequel. Roland Emmerich had bought a house down in Puerto Vallarta, and where the first film took place in the desert. We were planning to do the next one would take place in the jungle. We were talking about the sequel. It's going to be fantastic. And they went off and made a TV show. And that was the end of the film franchise. That was sort of the end of that. It was just, they made a TV series out of it. And so we didn't go to the jungle. And I think, haven't they made several now TV series or something? There's spin-offs of spin-offs, I think, or something. I don't know. Anyway, I have no idea. I've never seen anything of it, so I don't know. It's had no effect on my life at all.
If you look back on your career, is there a film or a project that you recognize as having the, not to speak in absolutes here, but having a great effect? Not the most effect, but a great effect on your life?
Yeah, there have been several along the way. But sometimes it's something as small as like, oh, somebody sees you in something that no one else saw you in, and they thought it was great or something, and they want you to do this thing. They want you to do some picture or something. I don't know. But, I mean, right now, probably one of them is, I've been very lucky. I've been able to do film work and television work and theater, and a lot of it all sort of mixed in at the same time. I've been very, very lucky that way. But I must say there was, I really wasn't ever looking at, I had never even really considered the idea when I was only doing film work. I really hadn't considered the idea of doing any television work. And then my agent called me one day and said, David Kelly, this writer, creator of TV shows, very, very successful, would like to talk to you about working on something. And I said, well, what is it? I said, we hadn't really even thought, I was looking for the next film to do. And she said, he wants to talk to you about coming on this show that he has that's been very successful called The Practice on television. I said, well, why would I do that? And she said, I think you should speak to him. He's a very interesting guy. He'd seen something I'd done.
Do you remember what it was he'd seen?
No. He might have seen several things. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, he'd seen something, and he wanted to talk to me. And she said, are you aware of The Practice? I said, no, I've never seen it. I don't know anything about it. And she said, well, something rather dramatic has just happened. And I said, okay. Anyway, she said, go and speak to him about it. He'll explain the whole thing. So I went to have coffee with him in this little coffee shop. And he's he's very shy, but lovely guy. Lovely, lovely man who I became very good friends with. I really had a wonderful, wonderful time working with him. The network had cut his licensing fee, which I know sounds, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. I really don't even understand it myself. But anyway, what they paid him to do the show, the money he would have to make the show, they cut in half in the show's 8th season. And he had a choice. He could either shut down the show, because he didn't think that he could make the show for that amount of money, to the same standards that he had been making it. This was their 8th year. And so they'd cut the licensing fee in half. And so he said, I can't make the show to the standard that I have. So I either shut down the show, in which case 250 people are out of work, or I cut off the top tier of the show, which ultimately is the largest amount of money. And so he'd done that, and he had fired 6 actors on the show, the leads on the show. But he wanted to do another season to keep everybody working, keep the crew working and everybody else, and some of the other actors were, keep them going. And he felt that the leads of the show would do fine on their own, go on and whatever. But so he'd fired 6 people, and he wanted me to come in. And he said, have you ever seen the show? I said, no. He said, don't watch it. I just want you to come in. And he said, it's this character that I'm sort of conceived of. This is a law firm. And he said, I want this character to be sort of like the Cat in the Hat, where he comes in and just makes a mess of everything and is somehow able to sort of skate through it all and and come out on top on the other side. He said, I want him to be irreverent. The show has started to take itself very seriously. It's become very, very sort of dour. And he said, I want to inject the show with something entirely. Well, what he really wanted to do is he wanted to burn that house down, and I was going to carry the match. And so that's what he really wanted to do.
Fun.
Fun. And he said to me, we're sitting there doing the thing. I had no concept of what it is to do a TV show. And he said, I'll guarantee you a year, but if you, he said, I can't put this in your contract, obviously, because the studio would never allow, or the network. But he said, I promise you that if you hate it, because I know you've never done a television show, if you absolutely hate it, if you come to me, I'll write you out. Well, I mean, that's better than a horse's head in the bed, right? I mean, how could I refuse that? I mean, it just sounds like such fun, and it was so gracious and lovely, and what a lovely thing, you know. I'll guarantee you a year, but if you want out, I'll let you out, you know. So I did it, and I was introduced to this strange world of doing this, of television, that I never really had never understood. Or I'd done a few episodes of something at one point, and I'd done a couple of television movies or something, but I'd never really done anything that I understood what it was about, and to explore a character over a period of time. Well, then, lo and behold, in the middle of the year, ABC said, we'd like to now do a show with that character in a different, you know, on its own show. And that was another entire experience. It was very strange. So
4 seasons of 5.
5, I think,
Yeah.
or something. I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, there have been things like that through the years that have been like that. You know, another one actually was a film that you talked about, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, where it was, you know, that was a tiny little movie that other people were sort of thinking was just a perverted little thing. And I liked it. I thought it was funny and different and incredibly unique. And I liked the writer-director very much, Steven Soderbergh, when I met with him. And, you know, I just thought it was intriguing, really intriguing. And so I did it. I didn't think anybody would see it.
He won Best Screenplay for that, right? Or something like that, I think.
I think he was nominated for it or something. I don't know. I never really watched the Academy Awards very much. But he, you know, I remember the first time I saw the film screened, even when I finished making the film, I thought, that was a very satisfying experience making the film. But I sort of still walked away from it feeling like, I don't know whether anyone's going to end up seeing that, you know. But, you know, whatever. Because my career had always been sort of, you know, split pretty evenly between sort of big sort of studio pictures and small little independent films. And I definitely thought this was something that was small, you know. And the independent film had, to that point, had really just been that. It was just these sort of small little films that you didn't know where they had a life really and where they went and so on. And then I saw it screened in a big theater, full, and it was funny. People laughed, and it was funny and intriguing, but it was funny. And the film, people saw it.
It's a wonderful film, and it is very funny, and it's weird that then it would be viewed as pervy, or you look back on it, watch it now, like, you know, 30 years later, it almost feels kind of chaste, and in some ways, its approach to sex. It doesn't feel exploitative.
I think in fact it was incredibly chaste. I mean, I thought at the time it was that. I mean, that was the thing that was sort of intriguing about it. I thought was that it was all about that, really. It was about a dysfunction. And because of this incredible dysfunction, the dysfunction manifests in this other sort of very strange pursuit or behavior, you know.
You still have one of my favorite lines. I'm being told to rap, but I'm going to say this line anyway, which is when you're asked, why don't you get an apartment? And your character says, well, because then I'd have another key. And I'd have this key, and then just life is just more keys. Love that.
He had a car key.
You didn't want more keys. It's beautiful. James, I have to let you go. The Blacklist season 5 premieres tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, right? Absolutely, at 8 o'clock. I got a thumbs up back there from the publicist.
Yes, 8 o'clock tomorrow night.
One of my favorite actors of all times. Give it up for James Spader, everybody.